Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Sales SOS podcast, streaming live on LinkedIn. And I am Liz Hyman, your host. And I have with me Christopher Bowen. I have Bryn Tillman. I have Mike Simmons, Renee Bigelow, and John Way. And they are our crew today that's going to help save you from your sales nightmares. So today we're going to talk about CRM. And we're going to have 4 different segments. The first segment, we're going to talk about what is a CRM. Second segment, we're going to talk about what to consider when you're setting up your CRM. We're going to talk about mistakes, and then we're going to talk about maintaining your CRM. So let's start with our first section. I want to talk about what is a CRM. And I want to really quickly go into the history of CRM, which is really close to my heart. Because I know some of the people that were the early factors in doing that. So let me talk a little bit about the history, and then let's talk about what this thing called CRM does. So CRM, Customer Relationship Management Software. So how did this start? So some of you can remember a long, long time ago, many, many moons ago, when you had, what did you guys have? How did you keep track of those names?
A Rolodex.
Yes, a Rolodex, which
No,
was...
we all say that together, but I guess
thought we would all say that together. But that's okay. So we had this Rolodex, this paper thing that you younger people are listening have never seen, and it kind of flipped around and you had all of your addresses on these little paper index cards. So that was the first thing. And then we had this amazing thing, this company called Microsoft, this brand new, exciting company, created this thing called Outlook, where we could actually put addresses into our computer and have a way to look them up. And then the next thing was we had this program called A.C.T.S that everybody used that was sort of a relational database. It was the very first relational database, which is what all this new technology's been built on since then. And it was still really clunky. And all it really did was give you an address and a little bit more information. And then next, my friend, John Farrar, took a program called Strategic Selling, which I think almost everybody here has taken. And it was about managing your sales and through a pipeline, through a process, and understanding who all the different buyers were. And John took this course and went, oh my gosh, this should be a program. And he created something we call Goldmine. And at the same time, Oracle and SAS and some of these other big companies were also creating these databases. But when Goldmine was created, it was on a server. Some of you may not even know that word, in our offices. And then Benioff created Salesforce, and it was the first CRM that was in the cloud. So it totally changed the way we think about CRM. So now we had a tool that did a couple of things, right? It helped us keep track of all of these people, and it helped us manage them through a pipeline. So I'm going to send this back out. Before I start, though, everybody tell me, what was the first CRM you ever used?
Goldmine. Thank you, John.
Siebel for me, but I also did Siebel and a few others. So
Siebel.
Oracle.
Oracle.
The kind of precursor A.C.T.S was the first one I was on, but then in media companies we did a fulfillment, was sort of the fulfillment software got the CRM. So after that was Salesforce.
It was like a proprietary kind of.
Yeah, an industry specific. Yeah.
And so I actually had a spreadsheet that was set up in the Miller-Hyman methodology that I used until about 5 years ago. Believe it or not. So who loves, fixing CRMs, that I used this spreadsheet for years.
Well, I mean, can I just say, Liz, I think to be fair, I think that works for businesses who are getting started. Like, I think that's something important to say. It's like when you're dealing with small scale. So if you're dealing with less than 100 people, a spreadsheet might work perfectly fine for you. The CRM kicks in when that gets too hard to manage, right?
Right.
So I just wanted to take a moment to I don't have small businesses who are like need a CRM or they have contacts, right?
Yeah.
Like they don't need it yet. That can be 6 months from now or whatever.
Right.
So-
And I think some of it also depends on how your process is, right? If your process is relatively straightforward at that point, and you're engaging with maybe a single buyer on the other side or just a small buying committee, you can probably do that. It's when you start getting into more complexity that it's just difficult to manage consistently across a large number of accounts and a large number of contacts on a spreadsheet and do it effectively. But
Okay.
starting
So one
out, you need
reason-
to understand your process.
One reason to start using a CRM is that you have a complex sale with a lot of people over a long period of time, and there's a lot more information to manage. Yeah, Bryn.
So I'm going to say, and I did spreadsheets for some time, but today it's so easy to start with a CRM, even with a one-person shop. There's like, you can get HubSpot with one seat. You could get, John Ferrara now has Nimble, which is a CRM, social CRM for, I don't know, under $50 a month. I don't even know what it is, but it's amazing. Like there's a lot that we can do today. And I'm going to say that from a spreadsheet perspective, I couldn't categorize things well, and I couldn't find things well. And if someone switched a job, it was just kind of a nightmare. I was doing like, the command find, right? Like for everything. And so, when I switched over to a very easy to use spreadsheet, from spreadsheet to CRM, it's kind of life changing. And especially like, adding in your notes, you've got a good timestamp of when those notes are. And then if you have an assistant that's helping, you have real time information on what was the last activity done. So as much as I think, it's just so cheap and so inexpensive to start a CRM right away, I think it makes all the difference in the world. And then you can scale when you're ready to scale. It's so much easier.
I think to your point, it's one of the things that, in this particular episode about what a CRM can do. I think if you're, to Renee's point, if you're a young company, or to Chris's point, your sales process is pretty simple, then yeah, you can probably do with a spreadsheet. But as it gets more complex, like you're trying to track all of the sales motions, all the sales activities, and you can keep on top of like who performed them, or when's the next one that you have to do, then I completely agree with Bren in the fact that it quickly overwhelms that spreadsheet. I mean, you're going to have hundreds of columns trying to keep track of that, and at that point, you're going to need a CRM. So, to me, the level or the time in which you're like, okay, I'm going to move beyond just tracking contacts and their email addresses to I'm going to start tracking tasks and whether or not those tasks are done, then you've got to move to a CRM at that point.
Well, and the other thing that I love about, John, what you're saying is you can even schedule tasks, right? So if instead of having to go into your calendar, so what I used to do is someone would say, okay, follow up with me in 3 months. And I'd say, great. How's Tuesday, June 7th at 10 a.m.? Great. And then I'd send a calendar invite. And then I would get to that calendar invite 5 minutes before, and I'm like, oh my God, who was this person? I don't remember. I have no clue, right? Like, and so having that CRM where I can see, okay, I talked to them then, I've got their LinkedIn content in there, and now I have a note taker. So I will actually put a link to the conversation in the CRM. Now, yes, you could do that in a database, but in 2 seconds, I can now pull that up. And I can actually pre-call plan in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
So
there are a lot of things within the CRM that help us as individuals to do our job. Mike, why don't you jump in here and share some of your thoughts on why a CRM?
I think one of the big things to figure out first is like, what's the job to be done? Just like hiring employees or hiring somebody else that you're bringing into the organization. We talked last time about AI and having interns. Everybody getting the little bit of feedback.
Yeah,
for sure.
So one of the challenges is figuring out what's the specific job to be done. Job to be done of the tool, job to be done of the table inside the database, job to be done of the process that you organize in there. And if you struggle answering those questions, throwing technology at something for the sake of having technology is not a good path. You can create a lot of waste. You can get yourself into a situation where you start to build speed and scale on something that doesn't work. So focus on the job to be done of the system, the problem that you're working on trying to solve at the point in time, and then go from there. There's no shortage of tools that exist out there that you can use. And the way that I like to think about CRMs is they are primarily a database of people, individuals, companies, the place where people congregate, and deals, how organizations make money. And we use those deals to demonstrate pipeline that's created and forecasted. So what are we looking at some point in the future relative to money? And then beyond that, you start to think about who are the people that need to have access to all of that? What kind of access do they need to have? What kind of information do they need to see that helps minimize the number of meetings that we have to talk about stuff that we already know that's already in the tool? So those are just a couple of the things that I like to think about when thinking about implementing any kind of technology, including a CRM, and then designing and building out the actual CRM inside an org.
Yeah, so I love that. So there's two sides to this here that we're talking about. The first is, as an individual, how do I manage my time, my activities, my priorities around my sales work in order to get done what I need to get done, right? So being able to have activities that I can schedule so I don't have to remember. I can actually say, here's the activity on this date. Call John and follow up about implementing this software in his company, right? So I can actually say, what am I going to talk to them? Find out if they got this done yet, whatever it is. So not just follow up, but what are we doing? So I have an activity, I have a date, I have them in a stage in the funnel so that I know, whether or not I have enough in my funnel to help me hit my goals. So I have phone numbers, I have addresses, I have all these things that I need in order to communicate. I have an email address I can click and send. If I'm really fancy, I have a phone number I can click and dial. Right. So all of these things that as an individual, it improves my ability to function as a salesperson. So now then there's the other side of it that Mike was talking about. And that is, as a manager of a lot of people or as the owner of a company, I now have the ability to forecast, to understand where there are holes in the funnel, in the pipeline that are going to mean that I am not going to hit my numbers. It enables me to predict how much I should be developing or how much production I need to support sales, how many employees I'm going to need or need to get rid of, right? Where I need to add resources to the company. I can look at which salespeople are doing well and which ones aren't. There's all this information that I can gather. So it does two things. And one of the problems comes, and we're going to talk about this a little bit, is when we forget what our purpose is, right? What's the purpose for doing this? And I am like a huge fan of the CRMs done right. And more often than not, I see CRMs done wrong. So we're going to talk about that in a second. What else did I miss? Like, why else have a CRM? What else should it be doing for you? Yeah, Renee, go ahead.
I'll add in, and as usual, I will also say, from the perspective of the customer, maybe, because that's the piece I think we haven't included. What a CRM helps do, as Mike mentioned, it's a database, right? So we have the database. And a little bit about Brent and Liz talked about is that it helps us surface information when we need it, and it brings it up for the right people. From the customer perspective, that means when I call in and I say, hey, I want to do this, or I'm having a problem with this, it means someone can look it up, see my account, and I don't start from zero with every conversation I have, right? It also means that someone is managing more complex things for me, right? Like they can tell me what's needed next. They can help me with those steps, and it makes a smoother journey for me. If you go beyond sales and you have sort of the pre-sale activity or your marketing activity and then your service potential, now you can provide a complete smooth process where you don't have a customer who's like, I don't understand why you don't know this. I told the salesperson all of this, right? Or I filled out all these forms on the marketing side, or my account manager knows all this. Why haven't you talked to them, right? Like a CRM is where all of that, if it becomes that source of truth that John mentioned before, and all that data goes in there, and it's a program that helps surface that information. Yes, it can help you manage things better and run the business and forecast, but from the customer point of view, it provides a much more seamless, less schizophrenic customer journey.
Yeah.
Now, if I can just add, there's also a marketing component too, right? And that's one of the things I love is when, if a client clicks through an email and I know it. So there's a marketing component as well with CRMs that really can help, because marketing and sales talk to each other, but also give us triggers that can help in our sales process as well.
Yeah, and I think that this idea that it can do more than just help salespeople manage their time. So when we started with the CRM, we had Pipedrive. When Salesforce just started, they were relatively simple tools that just helped us manage a sale through the pipeline. We add a marketing component to one side. Now, not only can we manage it through the sales engagement, we can manage it from marketing to close. We now can really, truly track lead source if we do it right, and really know where we're spending money that's effective and where it's not. We can figure out better what leads are qualified. We can do all these things with it. But then it gets even more involved, and you can actually, some CRMs allow you to bring the proposal right into the CRM. You can actually send it from the CRM. You can mark it paid from the CRM, right? So now you're bringing in these other tools that now enable that salesperson to see the bigger picture, help our client better, but it also helps leadership see the whole picture better. Mike, it looks like you were going to say something. What are you thinking?
I think and this is probably going to come up in the challenges discussion, but there's so much it can do. Should it?
Right.
Like,
this is a really good question.
And I know that'll come up a little bit later. So that's what's going on in my brain.
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. So, but the bottom line is this CRM can do a lot of things, right? And you can tie other tools to it, right? So I can tie my QuickBooks to it. I can tie my dialer to it. I can tie my scheduling tool to it. Right? So as you begin to build this out, then you get to the part that Mike's talking about is now all of a sudden, does it do too much? As a salesperson, am I so overwhelmed by all of the different things? Or is it really a tool that makes my day so easy? And I think that is the most important piece. Like John, we missed John because we started and we weren't recording. So John gets to say again that your CRM is what, John?
It's your single source of truth for everything related to the customer.
Right. So if we know that, if we have that, that's a really good starting place. John, were you going to say something else?
No, I think I think you summed it up really nicely. And I really like the thought process and the strategic thinking about at what point is it too much? I think that's one of the things that I think people make CRMs the panacea, the utopia tool, the one tool that rules them all. They just want to throw everything in there. But I really like the strategic thinking of like, at what point is it too much?
Yeah, and we're going to get to that in just a couple more minutes. The one more thought that I have about the CRM is, if you want your salespeople to use the CRM, it has to be so easy to use that they want to be using it. The moment you put other people's needs ahead of sales, your salespeople will stop using it. And that is because they're the ones that are not in front of their CRM. They're the ones that are in other tools all day. They're the ones that are running around. And so the more you make it difficult for your salespeople to use it, the less they will use it and the less valuable of a tool it will be.
Well, and you have to understand when and how they're going to use it. I mean, I realize that coming out of the pandemic, certainly travel budgets aren't what they used to be, but it doesn't mean that they're always going to stay that way. And if you're somebody that's on the road and you're doing this from a phone or from a tablet, that's a very different experience than if I'm in my home office where I've got multiple monitors set up and I can work super easily and see everything I need to. If I'm now on a much smaller screen and you're asking me to fill out a field that has 200 entries in it, okay, guess what sort of adherence you're going to get for that, right?
So my one request, if there are any CRM makers out there listening to this, you got to let them do talk to text. Salespeople have to be able to, on their phone, say, move this from this stage to this stage, change the price from this to this, add this many widgets, right? At some point we have to understand that's what salespeople need.
Liz,
are you guys ready? Oh, go ahead, Renee.
I was just going to say, I'll add in, because the CRM does do so much more in so many places too. I'll just add in the exact same principle applies to your marketing team and your customer success team or support team if you're using it for that kind of service hub. It really, that what John and Mike were saying about strategic thought, and what you're trying to do is figure out what information to surface to which person using it, right? And that makes it easier to do their job. And then the leadership team or the analyst team can pull back out whatever they want, but you can't get what you need if you don't make it easy to get things in. And you don't help people with the tool if you don't make it easy to surface. So whatever team is using it, right? You have to make it easy to get it in and easy to surface what they need to do.
So I think this is a really great place to stop this conversation and invite you to join us in our next segment, where we talk about what do you want the CRM to do and what do you need to think about before you set up your CRM. So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you in the next segment. Okay. Hi, I'm Liz Hyman, and this is the Sales SOS podcast. And I have your crew here to save you from your sales nightmares. And we are going to talk now. We've been talking about CRMs and what they do. One of the things that we learn as we help companies with their CRMs is that they hadn't really thought through what they need the CRM to do before they started setting it up. So what I want to talk about now with you guys is what reports should we be looking for? How should we be, what are the important things we need to think about who's using it and how they're using it? Let's dive into some specifics about things to think about as you're planning and building or fixing your CRM today. So I don't know, one of my first thoughts is, the sales process part, right? That sales process part is really important. Maybe I'll throw it out to the team maybe we start there, or if you want to start somewhere else, that's okay too. What do we need to think about before we start? And Bryn has so many ideas. She loves to start.
Well, I mean, so I think, and this is going to sound a little old-fashioned, but I still think it's good, is I think we have to start with SMART goals. I think we have to look at, what exactly do we want to do? So what specifically do we want to do? How are we going to measure it? Like maybe what's the timeline around that? And there's process around that. So I think almost starting with, here are our SMART goals that we want to achieve. And then we can start thinking about how do we want to measure and track that in our CRM.
Yeah, I would build on that and just say, like, what does success look like? And then how do you plan on getting there? And what measures do you have in place to determine whether or not you're making progress? And if you can't answer those questions inside your organization, well, one, you've not earned the right to lead your organization. Go find somebody and bring them in to help you with that. If you have a team of people and you're not able to share this information, or at least have a conversation around what those things are, get better as a leader. But start first with, what is it that we're trying to accomplish? What's our mission? And then how do we organize around it? And how do we know that we're actually making progress toward it? Then you can build from there, because there's so much stuff you can put into these systems. And ultimately what you'll end up doing is creating waste, or some of the other things that were talked about in the last discussion, which is you create all these barriers where people are asked to put extra information that is meaningless. And what they do is they figure ways to work around the system. That's what I used to do. And now you've got crap information in the system that you're reporting on. Begin with the end in mind, which is, Covey thing.
Can I just really quickly on that? So I think with those two ideas, it's really making sure that the KPIs you're choosing are ones that we can act on. Like just put in KPIs that if we look at that key performance indicator, I can do something about it. Sometimes we're measuring things that are, just for data, but not for improvement. So
And if you're not achieving your goals and you have multiple KPIs, start reducing your KPIs.
Yeah.
Like,
And
just
I think this
one.
is a great conversation for another day, because I think we have so much trouble with KPIs. So let's put this on the calendar for a few months out, and let's really dig into this KPI issue. Chris, I know you're managing a team and you're using the CRM. What do you wish they had thought about when they put your CRM together?
Well, I did not, but I have in the past. I think the thing you have to really understand is who is it meant for, right? The daily users of this are going to be your salespeople, right? And not that there's not a whole lot of other people that may have access to some of this information, but the people that you're really dependent upon getting this stuff as close to accurate are your sellers. And if you don't have those sellers in mind when you're building it, you're gonna end up serving the wrong audience. And if you're talking about doing it from the front end, from a marketing perspective, or from a customer success or implementation perspective, it's the same thing. In those pieces of the solution, understand what it is that you need from them to be accurate, and then build it out for that audience. Then you'll get a lot higher quality data. It'll be more accurate more of the time, and you're going to be able to hopefully have a much higher level of reliance on what that information looks like. If we overcomplicate things, which I know is going to be our next topic, all the time, and I think it's usually because you have a misalignment between what you really are trying to do, and you're either solving for a one-off problem or something along those lines, which is not the place to do it.
John, what are your thoughts on this?
My thought is kind of similar to what was been said. CRM is not a strategy; it executes your strategy. So you have to know what that is. So to get into the really deep down specifics, Bren, in the last episode, you talked about being able to track activities, who's doing those activities, those due dates of activities, and to the everybody's point, if these are your critical sales motions that people have to execute in order to land a deal, that's what you need to set up in your CRM. Because if you and one of the things that we all know, right? If you measure it, it will happen. And so that's what you want to do with your CRM. These critical activities, you got to measure that. You got to measure it, and then it will happen. Otherwise, to what we talked about, why are you collecting all of this data? What is all of this data for?
Yeah, so let's dig in a little bit more, because I think, yeah, go ahead, Renee. Yeah.
I think this is a really important point, and I haven't heard anybody say it yet. I think you all just skipped the step, and I want to make sure that the people who really haven't done this before hear this part, which is the first thing you got to do is figure out what kind of customer journey you're trying to build, right? Like you have to know what is the journey that we expect to take people through, and then you have to everyone else's point, figure out the process that you want and that you can stand up, that you can support, and how to get those two things together, right? So we have to think of the customer and what we're putting them through, and is this the right step in the state that we want that journey in, and then can we make it easy through process for the people to support that journey along the way, internally and externally.
Okay, so process. So let's dig into that for a second. So we've got our marketing process, and our marketing process starts with different engagements, and then we start with filling out forms and asking for meetings, and right. So there's a process. There's a journey they want to take, and that we want to take them on, and we need to map that journey and have the right next actions happen in order to get that into the right person's hands, a right salesperson's hand, for that deal to turn into something that is business. So recognizing that part of the journey, then the next thing is when we're thinking about that sales process where we have the different stages, what does that really look like? Often we have in our head a journey or a sales process that doesn't necessarily match the buyer journey. So as we're building out that part of it, we really need to think through, how do buyers buy? And how do we map that along these stages so that they actually represent where the buyer is in their journey, which is way more important than where we are in our seller journey. So that's one of the kinds of things that we want to do. So let's talk a little bit about reports. So if you want to see certain information, you have to set it up in the CRM the right way. So everybody wants to see the funnel. Okay, what does the funnel look like? What does the funnel look like? But then I look at it and I'm like, okay, do you have that set up so you see what you need to see? Do you need to see it by product? Do you need to see it by industry? Do you need to see it by number? Do you need to see it by dollar amount? Like, what matters in your company when you're looking at that data? What other things, you guys, should we be thinking about reporting, and how we want to set up the CRM so that the reporting delivers what we want? Yeah, Fran.
So you started off with sales pipeline for sure. Sales forecast we touched on, but also sales performance, right? We can see how different salespeople are progressing, what their sales cycle timeline looks like, if they are moving, from stage to stage, and how quickly. Also, I think lead source effectiveness, right? So we've got leads that are coming in. Are they the right leads? Are they moving through the journey, or where are they getting stopped, so we can improve that? And one of the things I love is customer acquisition cost, or lifetime value of the customer. So that's something that we're looking at currently, because we have a membership, right? And so when we're looking at improving this, and we looked and we're like, wow, the lifetime of a client for us is between 8 and 9 months. We're like, oh, new clients, new, but how do we get that from 8 or 9 months to 14 or 15 months, especially if you're in a monthly recurring revenue? And so it took us a long time to figure out what our customer acquisition cost was and what our lifetime value was. And now I'm recognizing and our CRM did not really do that for us. So Stripe did, right? So we had to do a lot of work to figure that out. So I think that's a real value add that a CRM can do for us.
I think one other thing to me that's really important, especially in terms of reporting, is why did things close loss? What was the reason?
Yeah.
I mean, we always report on close one, which is great, but we also need to know why things close loss, because otherwise there's no way to fix it, right? There's no way to improve those numbers. So you have to be able to set up your CRM in such a way that when some stuff is marked as closed loss, you need to notate what happened.
Yeah, and I think it's really important knowing what happened and knowing that it's not always wrong. Like, it's okay to qualify out, but we want to see, how much time do we waste before we qualify out? Do we need to qualify them out earlier? Do we need to get better qualified leads to start with? Like, there's all kinds of stories in there about when we lose business and why we lose business. And I think you're wrong, John. I'm going to say right now, I think actually people talk more about why they lost it than why they won it, which is really important. Like, why did you win when you won? And most people don't know. It just was a fluke. What other things should we be measuring? Yeah, Renee.
Liz, I'll share it from the point of view of, and you and I have worked with clients together where this is really common. So I think this is the big question to start thinking about, is how do you want to be able to segment this data, right? So do you want to know, here's some just instances, that just some different fields that might be important to help you segment. Do you need to know how many employees there are in a company in order to know what you need to know about getting more customers or getting more leads or serving them better, right? Or do you need to know their revenue? Or do you need to know titles? That's something that's missing in a lot of them, right? So like, if you need to make a change to a company and that information, say you make a change in your product and you need to change terms or something like that, and you need to get to the owner of the company to sign something, you might have 10 people in there and not know who that is, right? So where you need to segment information in your reporting are some of the fields that you need to make sure get input from the beginning, right? So if your marketing team is going to need to look at conversions and see what's performing better to help you determine what your best target market is, then you're going to want to segment on some of those things, right? If you need to know how your service team needs to, Bryn brought up retention, who's staying longer, how do we see where our sweet spot is in retention? What are the people that do go from 9 months to 14 months? How you think you want to segment it is really important for the data that you're putting in to make sure that you get it there, because you can't run those reports until you have that data. So,
Yeah, John.
I think one other thing that I think Mike and you all will probably be interested. I'd be curious to know what you guys think as well, because there's so much that does happen, and I know Renee, I know you knew this very well, is that companies do A/B testing, and if you don't set up your CRM to be able to track what is A and what is B, you're never going to know what actually made the difference. So I'm very curious, Mike and Renee, how do you set up CRMs to be able to track A versus B as you're doing all of these kinds of testing in your sales processes?
That's more of a Renee question, because I get into like the marketing ops type stuff, and it is I think that stuff like the absolute plague, because I don't know the technical ins and outs of it. So I defer to Renee.
So, well, the reason why I say it's kind of goes back to that same question that I said about what do you want to be able to run segmentation by? Like, how did something perform versus the other, right? I will tell you, most of the companies that I work with, we would manage that via the marketing automation. In other words, it would go into the CRM in one way versus into the CRM another way before it even gets there, into the sales view, right? And it's going to be if it's all in one. So like if you're using HubSpot for marketing, sales, and service, then that would be in the automation in the background based on like form completion or clicking through on a UTM code or something like that. Like it'll automatically get appended in. And then you segment that list based on these people chose this, and that's what you give to sales. Like these people chose this one, we find them to perform better, and that's what you give to sales. So marketing is actually going to touch a lot more tech than just about anybody else in the company. And so they really need to know they're going to be managing a lot of different platforms, and they have to know how you want to run those reports in the CRM, because they're more than likely, in most companies, more than 75% of your leads are going to come in from something marketing has set up first, right? And so they have to get all of that data and all those different pieces of tech to speak to your CRM correctly, or if it's all in one, like with a HubSpot or Salesforce, to make sure it's all moving through the system properly too.
And then having the lead source follow the contact, the company, and the opportunity. So that original lead source should never go away. And those secondary lead sources need to follow all the way into the opportunity, and they often don't. So making sure, if you want to know that, then it's in the code that is the lead source. You know, a couple of other things that I ask people, and they can't answer because their CRM doesn't tell them. What percentage of your business is new versus existing clients? Which buyers are the first ones that typically reach out to you? Which category of buyers? You know, I'll ask them which product. They usually know which product is they sell the most of, but which product did you start with? Like there's a lot of things that we want to make sure that we're tracking in our CRMs to enable us to make decisions in the future. So when I'm making decisions about how much more of something I want to buy or sell, should we be producing more of this? Should we get the sales team to focus on this? The data in our CRM should help us answer those questions. But because we don't track it, because we're not forward thinking about what am I going to need? What information will I need in the future? We don't set up our CRMs to give us the data that we need. Yeah, Brent.
So and I'd be remiss if I didn't bring this up, but when you connect your CRM to Sales Navigator and you have a robust Sales Navigator program inside of a company, you can now, when you're doing your research, and you can see who in my company is connected to people in this company. You can see your social proximity to your buyers between your CRM and LinkedIn, not just with your connections. And you can see immediately, if you're in LinkedIn, if that person is in your CRM or if that account is in your CRM. So you can click through and get this. So I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the power of connecting Sales Navigator.
Well,
Okay,
what you're talking about, Brent, is enriching data with other
Right.
tools, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yes.
so some of that's going to come from marketing, right? Whatever those tools are. Some of that's going to be some sales enablement type tools. Some of that will be, I think LinkedIn Navigator would probably fall into that sales enablement side, right? And then you have like just data enrichment. So you could add in a Zoom info or purchase Hoovers or things like that, where you're enriching so that you can possibly take some of that lift off of salespeople to have to sit there and type in all these different things that we all need to run the company better.
Mhm.
You can add those in through data enrichment.
Mike, what were you going to say?
Yeah. So as leaders, I think one of the key questions that we want to ask, and this comes from the role for reflective model, and I use it when building CRMs inside organizations and adjusting the CRMs and fine tuning them. Number one, what? So what's the definition of the data or the piece of information or the field or the object or whatever it is that we're putting in? What's our definition? Let's get aligned there. So what?
I love that.
Like, why does it matter? Like, what are we actually going to do with this thing? Now what? What decisions will we actually make? What will we do next? And if we can't answer what, so what, now what, it doesn't deserve a spot in the CRM. I won't put it in there. And when we talked about some of the data at the front end, the two biggest data points for me are pipe, and I'm a sales guy and a success guy, generate revenue, pipeline created, pipeline developed. Pipeline created is a view of the future. Pipeline developed is a view of how things are moving through the process. And remember that sales generated are a lagging indicator. Sales happened in the past. All of these things, all these stages, and I can't wait till we talk about process at some point in the future, Liz, because I know we're all going to go back and forth on this stuff. These stages should be past tense because something already happened, right?
Yeah.
Like
We'll never agree on that, Mike.
we will not. We will not. But I threw it in now
conversation.
just to get everybody on my side. So
That's going to be the
role
debate.
for reflective model. What? So what? Now what? Apply it and evaluate some of the data that you've got in your system, and you might find out, hey, I'm actually asking my team to do too much, and my team is actually working for the technology rather than the technology working for my team. And if that's happening inside your organization, you're a bad leader.
So wait, I'm going to ask you a quick question. You have what, so what, now what? What about what's next?
That's the
Now what? Yeah. What?
Now what? Okay.
So what? Now what?
So
What's
two
next?
are in the past. One is what we're working toward.
Yeah, it's making a decision. So what? Like definition of what it is.
Mhm.
So what? Why does it matter?
Mhm.
Now what? What are we actually going to do with it? Like you might have a lot of stuff that
Mhm.
matters, but you're not going to do anything with it. Well, you can decide, do you want to turn something on to start collecting a lot of data,
Mhm.
or do you want to wait and start collecting that data at some point in the future? So what, now what? And it's a role of ROLFE, reflective model.
Some people also use what, why, how. Very similar.
Okay, let's wrap up this discussion. I would say there's one other thing that we want to make sure that we're really clear about, and that is that contact. Who are they? Are they a distributor? Are they a user, an end user? Are they a referrer? Are they a vendor? It matters, and it matters a lot. So if you cannot differentiate those things in your CRM later, you're going to have huge problems. Okay, so let's wrap up this discussion about what do you want to think about as you're setting up, and we're going to go into our favorite topic, which is mistakes people make. So we'll see you in the next episode. Thanks everybody for joining us. Hi, I'm Liz Hyman, and this is the Sales SOS podcast. And I'm here with the crew that's going to save you from your sales nightmares. And we've been talking about CRM for the last 2 episodes. Today, we're going to talk about the biggest mistakes we see when people set up CRMs. And we don't have a whole lot of time, so we're going to cram a lot into this really fast. When you make mistakes setting up your CRM, the results that you get, your ability to predict, your ability to make decisions, they're all at risk. So let's start in with, I don't know, Mike, why don't you start? What is like the biggest mistake you see people making when they're setting up their CRMs?
Designing the CRM for leadership and reporting rather than what the people who are actually selling stuff or engaging with customers actually do. You get a RevOps group to come in and design a bunch of things because they went to a talk and heard about all the cool things that they could report on and all the integrations that they could do, and they build it all up, and you build this monster of stuff that is not functional and is just bloated with crap. So that's my number one, and it drives me absolutely nuts.
So as a leadership team, it is important to think about what you need to know. Like, what do you need to know? Not everything you can possibly know, right? So reporting is important. Usability is more important, because if they're not filling it out, you got no data.
When they actually do their job and it enables them to do their job and the information comes naturally, it's amazing what kind of information you can gather, because we're humans. We have all these biases. So we believe things are a little bit different, like closed loss reason or closed won reason. The most common closed won reason that I see out there right now is relationship. What kind of relationship? Like, what am I going to do with it? Relationship, the person you're selling to happens to be their spouse happens to be your brother-in-law. Like, what does that mean? So yeah, designing
probably the most common closed loss reason is going to be price, right? And it's like, I always view that as the lazy answer. Like, price is a component, not going to say it's not, but it's usually not the primary reason why you lost.
What else are we doing wrong? What other mistakes, Brim? What other mistakes are we making?
So I think there's two. From the implementation, it's over customization. A lot of these tools can be used much more simply than we make them, but we think, oh, we want to add this, and all of those add steps that salespeople will not take or will just struggle to get through. So I think, believe it or not, an out of the box, especially if it's the first time you're implementing a CRM, may be the best way to go. Just follow the grid, right? Over time, you can see where your gaps are. And then when you improve the product, it's based on a real experience, a real need, versus I'm going to customize it in the beginning. The other one, and this is probably not at the right time, but it's still, I think, probably the biggest mistake, is insufficient training to the users on how to leverage it. That, they go through a training program and maybe they have a white paper that they can go back to look at, but there's just not good enough training so that they're prodding and poking and trying to find things and frustrated. And then that immediately will reduce your adoption rate.
Absolutely. And if you are going to customize, think about what you're taking out more than what you're adding in.
I love that. So yeah, that's
I think the
brilliant.
biggest mistake that I end up seeing is really too many required fields, too many steps in the process, and you're not taking into account who you're asking for that information. You're saying, oh, we have all these required fields to move on to the next step, and it's like, then you get somebody who actually sells and they look at it and say, we're only going to have that piece of information maybe 40% of the time when we get to that part. So you're asking this person, what you're really going to get is either bad data, most likely, right? Because they want to progress it. And then now you're going to be complaining that the data from sales doesn't match or doesn't fit what we ultimately end up on. Well, it's because you're asking for that data in an inappropriate spot. And are you actually looking at feedback from the people that use the system as to what works and what doesn't, what's missing that they need that would make it helpful for them, right? It doesn't mean you're always going to be able to give them everything they want, but you should at least understand what their needs are. So you do the same thing if it was a customer.
Right? Here's my one thing I say about salespeople all the time, and I'm a huge salesperson advocate. If you force them to give you an answer and they don't have it,
they'll make it up.
They'll make it up. Yeah. Salespeople love to make stuff up. They don't know the answer. They make something up and keep going. So
they can tap dance.
What?
They can tap dance in any meeting, right? Like, hey, you ask me a question I'm not prepared for, I'm going to give you something, right?
We hire creative people. They'll be creative.
Yep.
John or Renee, go ahead.
I will say that the number one thing I see, and again, I sit in a little bit different position. I work with sales very closely, so I understand a lot of the things that you're seeing, but I'll just kind of give a more global answer, which is if you go into it building for one piece or without the full 360 perspective, that's where you end up with the biggest messes that I've seen and out in the wild, right? So if you don't go in thinking what is the journey and what is the workflow for the team supporting the journey in tandem, and what is that all the way across, then you end up with a Frankenstein of things, and you frustrate the customers and the employees the whole way through, right? And the second part of that is there's almost always a sacred cow somewhere in the whole system that is kind of mucking that whole thing up. Like there's some person or department that has a stranglehold on it, and you're backwards engineering around that when you aren't supporting the journey and the workflow. So getting all the people at the table and on the same page before you build it out, to me, is the biggest piece.
I think to add to that point, this is John here. So I think a lot of people think that CRMs are a one and done type of system. It is never a one and done type of system. And because it is never done, just like when you buy Salesforce or anything like that, you need to have an internal product owner for that system because that's the person who's going to drive the roadmap. So I'll give you a horror story. In a Fortune 100 company that I was consulting with, they changed the CRM globally once a year. Once a year. So if you want new fields added, you want new things added to that dropdown once a year. I mean, imagine trying to be working in that company, right? And you're like, this thing doesn't work for me. You know, Chris, to your point, it's like too many. You get to change it once a year. I mean, that's crazy. But if that is how that CRM is managed internally from that product owner, well, then you have a really dysfunctional system, and it's not going to work for a lot of the people who are going to be using it, whether it be salespeople, marketing people, whatever. And so, to me, like from a technical side, there needs to be a product owner who owns that CRM, who listens to the internal stakeholders just like they would for customers, and they need to have sprints, for a lack of a better word, to update the system, to manage the system so that it's highly agile to what the business needs it to do, not once a year.
100%. 100%.
I think one of the things you have to look at. Sorry, Mike, is your process as you've defined it in your CRM. How does that relate to how your customers actually buy, right? And they're going to be different, but is there something that's at least an overlay there that you can look at and say, hey, we understand how the process works on both sides, and we're taking that into account? Because if you're just doing it for you, there's going to be a whole lot of holes.
So I'm going to say this, and I'm going to start a huge battle, but the meeting, demo, proposal, close. Like assuming that just because you send a proposal, it's ready to close, right? So being really thoughtful about how the buyer buys so that you don't end up with this big bulb of stuff floating around at the bottom. That's really important. I want to go back to what Renee said for a second, because and she was being really vague and kind, but I'm going to say the biggest nightmares I've seen is when accounting is the one that's dominating the process.
Mm-hmm.
The way accounting works and the way sales work couldn't be more diabolically opposed. Like it isn't possible to come up with something that's more different than those two functions, even though we're both talking about money. So the kinds of things that happen is I have this accounting system that may or may not be antiquated, probably is antiquated if it's doing dumb things. And it's forcing the CRM to create a new contact at each location in order to send an invoice. So, okay, great. So we'll just make 6 of that contact because there's a corporate when all the invoices go to corporate, but there's 7 locations. So we'll just make, however many of those person. And then sales is trying to figure out, what do I do here? or an accounting team that says you can't put it in the CRM until we've qualified it as a buyer who, you know, has gone through the credit process and can buy from us, because it can't get into our accounting system until that's true. So you can't put it in the CRM because then it'll go into our accounting system. Or how about we need a specific shipping address that works for accounting. And what accounting does is it creates a code. So we're going to create a contact that is a code that's a shipping address, right? These are the kinds of activities that happen when you're not thinking about, I don't need I don't need a bunch of fake. I need real information in the CRM. I don't need to mistakenly type it in the wrong version of that character, right? So really thinking about, what does accounting need, but how does that impact the data that we're getting? And it goes back to this, someone said earlier, if I only put it in once I'm creating a proposal, right, then I don't have the whole top of the funnel to measure. And so we really want to think about, what do I want to measure, and how do these other functions come into this without dominating it?
What, building on that point, Liz, it's going through all of the information that you have inside your system and understanding what the single point of truth is for each of those pieces. So as John talked about, single point of truth related to the customer and that kind of interaction, that flow. Yeah, good. There might be other things for other purposes inside the business, where there's data that resides in an ERP, or data that resides in a quoting tool, or data that resides in other places, where that ends up being the single point of truth of that specific object. And what's really cool with all of the integrations that are there is you can marry those things together and figure out ways to either get them connected natively or connect them through other kinds of sorcery that exist out there. One of the pieces that came up is this whole idea of, look, we've got to be really careful about where things are in the process. And I forget exactly how you said it, John, but where did you say about one of the mistakes that frustrates you inside the CRM? Can you restate it? And I'm at one of those senior allergy moments of, brain completely going into brain fog. But there was something you said specifically about the process before Chris started talking. Anybody remember? I'm gonna have to go back to the videotape and then on it later.
Videotape. I say it all the time. There's no more tape.
Come on, there's always going to be tape.
There's no more tape. I do it all the time.
Was it about being managing the CRM? Iterative, yes.
It was the iterative process, right? So you talked about sprints. So if it's never going to be done, it isn't going to be perfect when you launch. So get it out into the marketplace quickly, get it out in front of your team, and then listen to feedback. And that's where that product owner that John was talking about is so important, because somebody's got to care and be an advocate for the people who are using the tool, collect the information. Because there are 6 of us on this call. We could all describe the same thing slightly differently. And if somebody doesn't, you have a decoder ring to kind of pull those things together and synthesize the information, you're going to end up serving so many different purposes throughout the process. So leverage your engineering team internally to understand what agile methods are, iterative approaches to design, and how can you apply it in the building process as you go through and work for your team. It will never be perfect. So don't delay the launch because you just want to add one more thing into it.
Absolutely. I think, and for me, there's one more, Renee, I'll get back to you in just a second. There's one more thing that I think is really important, and it's a term I made up. I don't know if other people use it, but I call it data mush. And this is when we have fields that we have combined a whole bunch of different things into one field, so it actually measures nothing. So for instance, an example of that would be contact type. And so under contact type, we might have prospect, client, priority 1, list 350, right? So we have these different kinds of things that we're trying to measure inside the same thing, because either we think we don't understand why they're different, or we think, oh, well, we don't want to add more fields, so let's just add more options. Well, 2 things happen. 1, you get this data all mushed together. 2, now the salesperson has to go through 40 choices. How many will the salesperson actually go through before they just select one? Like 10 maybe. And then they're just like, I'll just pick one. Go
Is
ahead.
is it on the first page, right? Like, maybe,
Right.
maybe I'll hit the
You
down
love
button
the
once,
goals,
but
Renee.
I'm not going beyond that.
Well, I
Well,
guess
the
I have a
the cool thing is if I had an asterisk to the name, the front end of my deal name, it all of a sudden is all the way at the top of my list. I'm just going to throw an asterisk on there.
Liz, and can I just point out that kind of one of the threads that all of us have said essentially is probably one of the biggest mistakes is that is not having someone who knows what they're doing running this. And that kind of falls into like when something gets an outsized vote or there's a sacred cow or the process doesn't match the workflow process doesn't match the buyer's journey, like people will invest so much money in all of these different things and yet they hesitate to invest in the person who's going to be like running the heart and soul and the brain that's going to run your company, right? Like your workflows are all going to get mapped to this and process and different teams are going to touch it. It makes a huge difference in the experience that your customers and anyone else has with your company. But when you give it to someone that doesn't know what they're doing, so you and I, Liz, have both seen instances where someone in accounting is running the CRM and has no idea how the sales process, but they're the most data knowledgeable person in the company, so it lands there. And you can have, I've also seen marketing teams that have no idea. I mean, I've been fortunate in my life that I've worked inside of a sales department at one point and really inherently understand the sales process, but there are some marketing teams that don't, but because they're the ones that have the tech savviness. And then you have some where it's an IT department and that, or an engineering team, right? And that's where you get that mismatch that John talked about, which is we're only going to update this when it fits our workflow, not when it fits the needs of the business, right? So investing in having some sort of ops team that really understands this is, I think, one of the biggest mistakes that I see, that people they'll go spend a ton of money on the software and then hand it over to somebody who isn't equipped to manage it.
Hang on, Bryn, 1 second, because I want to just dig into this a little deeper. So
It's on that too. So
having somebody who knows what they're doing, and what does that mean? It means they understand the flow of information. They understand the processes, the systems, and maybe understand the tech side too. Literally, Renee and I have worked with a client who spent a ton of money customizing a CRM to do things it shouldn't do because nobody really understood what it should be doing. Right. So thinking clearly, making sure, if you don't know how it should work, hire somebody who can help you figure out how to set it up. It may seem like a lot of money. It's a lot less money than what I keep seeing, which is our CRM doesn't work. We're going to get a new one. So let's take all these bad habits we had in the old one, bring it into the new one. And this CRM still doesn't work because we brought all our bad habits into it. So getting help when you need it. Bryn,
well, just really quickly in the mindset of the E-Myth, right? So I don't know if you know the book, The E-Myth by Michael Gerber, but you've got to record your steps. So we had a challenge in our company where it was very hard to transition workload, and it wasn't CRM, but it's the same thing, from one person to another person because it was all in their head, right? So getting that champion and getting that expert is fabulous. We've got to download their brain into a process that can be transferable. So when they win the lottery and leave for Hawaii, right, and we have to put someone else in that spot, that there are instructions on how to do all of these things that have been recorded for posterity, not prosperity. Well, yeah, for that too, for both. But ultimately, I think that one of the biggest mistakes that businesses make is they have that champion, they rely on that champion, but it's all in their head.
Okay, Mike, last comment, and then I want to move to our next segment.
Number one, if you need someone to help with documenting processes, there's nobody other than John Way that I would go to. Like, he's awesome when it comes to getting some of that system stuff down. The thing I would add is when you hire that expert, let them do their job, which should include some kind of discovery. If you hire that expert and they start doing their job without any discovery, you hired the wrong expert.
And
Absolutely.
I would just add, to be clear, there's getting the expert to help you set it up, but then there's also somebody to maintain it.
Yeah, and let's talk about that now. So that is the perfect cue to bring us into our next segment. So thanks you guys for talking to us about mistakes that people make with their CRM. Hi, I'm Liz Hyman, and this is the Sales SOS podcast, and I'm your host, and this is your crew who's going to help save you from your sales nightmares. I am talking to this team about CRMs. We've had a couple of segments talking about what they are, how they work, and mistakes that people make when they're setting them up. Let's talk now about the continued use. Like there's protocols that we need to put in place. So nothing's worse than having a bunch of data that isn't accurate. So we need to talk a little bit about what are some of the protocols you need to put in place around entering data, around moving things through whatever it is. Let's talk about that and maybe the iterative process for keeping that CRM doing the things that we needed to do. So, maybe, I don't know, Chris, maybe we start with you this time. What are some of the protocols that you put in place for your team around using the CRM, naming, what kinds of things do we need to be thinking about?
Well, I think you start out with how are you going to be inputting accounts. Almost every large organization ultimately gets to a point where that goes through at least an approval process of some sort, because you don't want all of the different variations of an account to be in there, because that's going to mess up your data. It's going to mess up your reporting. It's as a sales leader, it's going to mess up your conversations that you're able to actually have, right? So you want to make sure that your data is at least as clean and accurate as you can get it. So you make that part easy. The other thing that you want to be able to do is make sure that you're able to find the information that you need, that it's consistently laid out, and that you're not overimposing one piece of the organization over another, as we talked about earlier. With you don't want accountants running your CRM, right? That or what have you. You want somebody who actually has an understanding, at least to some degree, of that revenue stream, not just what the output is.
Okay, so naming protocols is where we're starting. So what do we need naming protocols around? Actually, the name of the company, the account, right? Because we don't want Coca-Cola Incorporated, right? Which I've seen a million times. There are 16 iterations. Or how about state? Is it spelled out? Is it 2 letters? Or is it spelled wrong? Is it spelled right? Or city, right?
Or you'll have people that add ink to the back of a name or whatever, right? And next thing you know, you've got 15 versions of that same account.
So you either need to have a protocol that says we pull it from their website, or every company is put in this way. It's all capital letters. It's all small letters. We name, we put ink, we don't put ink, whatever it is, but we set the rule so it's consistent. So you don't end up with duplicates. What's really cool is, and I'm not a HubSpot fan, but what I will say is what's really cool is if you use HubSpot and you type in the URL, it will pull up the name that they have on their website. So that would help prevent some of that. What other things?
Why are you not a HubSpot fan?
I know, I love HubSpot.
Yeah. Like what?
I'm learning. I'm learning to like it more and more, actually. I like the associative part of it too. So I'm actually becoming more of a fan.
The number one thing she hates is the sales view. It's that's it. The other parts.
We can have a conversation about this, Liz. Like, so here we had asked about ways to make it simpler. One of the things that I do now that I wish I would have figured out a long time ago, and I didn't, and now that I have, I feel like I've found the light, or I'm drinking the right Kool-Aid, or whatever that thing is. I set up the dashboards on any implementation so that the leadership team dashboard is a roll-up of all of the dashboards. The grouping of sub-company or sub-teams, we're all looking at the same view. The only thing that's changed is the filtering of the dashboard. So we're all looking at the same information. And then the individual rep dashboard is the same information, just filtered by them. And by going through that simple process, communication is so much better across teams, across functional organizations, across the entire group. That has changed everything for me. And that is one of the reasons I'm a big fan of, and you can do it with Salesforce too, but a big fan of HubSpot and filtering that is supported in dashboards.
Yeah. So dashboards are really important, and how they're set up is important. And that we all look at things the same way. Like if every person in your team looks at stuff differently, they understand it differently. So what other protocols, what other naming protocols or other protocols do we need to have?
I have a big one, Liz.
Yeah.
This is Renee. I have a really big one, and that is in this exact same way that Chris pointed out the input of it, like when it's person doing one contact at a time, like putting in a company name, you have to think about when you're going to be importing and integrating data from multiple sources. And again, got to speak up here because marketers probably touch more tech than anybody in the entire company. You're going to be integrating data in from different places. You have to build it out properly, but that mapping of the integrations where you get things in, if you press one button wrong, you're going to change everything because you're changing the source of truth. So having one person oversee the protocols for the mapping of integrations and and being the keeper of the source of truth, so that if somebody's like, okay, maybe you're using Salesforce and HubSpot. A lot of companies do that. Don't love it. Matter of fact, I hate it. But if you're taking marketing leads, right, and moving them into the CRM and Salesforce, you can automatically override tons of valuable sales information if you don't know what you're doing when you integrate that data, right? So you have to choose which one is the source of truth. And once you decide which one is the source of truth, how you respect the source of truth when you get that data in. And it's one of the biggest places I see process fall apart.
I think you have to have naming conventions around whatever it is you sell, the product name or solution, whatever it is. Have some structure that you're using for that, so it's easy for people to understand. Because you can get in, especially in technology, you can get a whole lot of things that sound similar, but in reality are quite different. And if you get those things mixed up, you're going to end up with bad data, even down to that level, which means you may end up hiring for a particular thing that you think is coming and find out later that it's something very different. And next thing you know, you're worried, you're creating more problems for your business, not helping.
Absolutely. What other protocols or conventions do we need?
I think one is Bryn talked about it in the last episode, which is, and Chris talked about it too, which is internal training for users on how to use the CRM. Because like you said, Chris, contact type could mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people, especially because they may be coming on, we cannot assume, and most likely this is the case, salespeople move from company to company. Their lexicon and terminology of things are going to change. So you can't assume that they're all going to understand the same thing for you. That to me is one of the biggest ones. I know that this was a nightmare in the companies that I have dealt with in before. I'm very curious to know what y'all's thoughts are. And this is specifically around data and rules around accounts that have either been merged, meaning Coca-Cola bought this other company, right? How do I preserve the history of these two companies together into one? And
Can
that
I
may
just
be
stop
pretty
you
easy.
for 1 second? Because maybe
Sure.
Coca-Cola should be sponsoring us.
Yeah, maybe.
John.
That the other difficult and happens a lot is spin-offs, divestitures. So we've had companies where they split. You're a vendor for this particular company. They split. Now you want to track the history of that split. We've in the past, in one of the Fortune 100s, they split 3 times within like 2 years. So how, as a supplier, do you manage all of that and that relationship? Because typically, a lot of times, what ends up happening is that somebody just creates a brand new account for that, and now you have zero history, zero conversation, nothing, right? And you do that. You lose all of it. There was now in that company that I consulted for, they did not have a good strategy for this. I'm so curious to know what you guys do and how you guys do that.
Well, I think the first part is you actually should have some level of understanding or rules around this on how you deal with it from a salesperson perspective, right? If there's multiple accounts that if someone gets acquired or someone gets divested, who now owns that account, right? And maybe it's multiple people, but let's just assume it's one. How do you handle that? Is it the person who had the parent company? Well, what if the person who had the acquired company had done 5x the revenue over the past 24 months than the person who owned the parent company who was still trying to get in? You still going to give it to that guy, right? Have some understanding of how you're actually going to allocate these things. If you have those rules set up, then it becomes a whole lot easier when the business decision from an entity that you have no ability to control actually splits, merges, acquires, what have you. You've got some basis for how we're going to handle it from an organizational perspective.
Yeah.
I'm going to add one that I can't believe would come out of my mouth, but privacy and security protocols. Because I never think in terms of this, but it just popped in my head, the ability to or not to be able to, who can download information, who can get to that content. And I think that's something that is, especially as an emerging company, that you have to really think about is, I guess, level of user privacy and security. I don't know. I don't know much more about that, but it just popped in my head, and it's pretty important to keep
It's
the
more and more important.
It was actually going to be my next point too, Bryn. I agree with you wholeheartedly. User permissions, a lot of protocol around user permissions. I have come in on multiple occasions right as an entire department has quit. Right. That's part of like why I've come in. I mean, believe it or not, and especially over COVID, this was happening a lot. You get one person leaving, and in some of these smaller companies, there's a little bit of chaos. One person leaves, and then it's like a domino effect of a bunch of people leaving. And almost to a T, all of them had someone export their all the client lists and take them with them to a competitor.
Right.
Right. So separate of that, you also have privacy issues with adhering to rules and regulations, particularly if you're a regulated market. If you have HIPAA regulations or something like that, or legal repercussions, you have to be if you have a company that has any data on minors, you have to be extremely careful on how that data is treated as well. So user permissions that protect the company and protect the customer, but also protect employees, right? Yeah. I've seen a marketer like brokenhearted and scared of being fired because they thought they were deleting a list and they actually deleted a bunch of contacts, right? So like you're protecting all involved when you do that.
One of the things John asked about was the whole kind of merging of information. I think there are a couple of different ways that you can look at it. One is parent-child relationships inside the CRM. The other one is kind of like an AC or a BCAD type thing, where it is, what do we do prior to it, and do we have it just as a historic record, and is everything in one area as things go through? And a lot of that comes into the process stuff that Chris was talking about. As you think about those permissions, think about what happens when you maybe when someone is exiting the relationship but needs to work through a transition period. So they might need to have access to certain things during that transition period, but shouldn't have access to everything. How can you turn certain things on or off, and who has access to what, and what can they change, and what things can they potentially disconnect? I went through a nightmare scenario with HubSpot recently where the only way that we could have an integration work was if we turned everybody into a super admin for the first part of the integration. And Renee, thanks for rolling your eyes. You're like, are you freaking kidding me, guys? Like, have you never done this integration before? Now, on the cool part about it, we only had to turn it on while the integration happened, and then we could turn it off afterwards. But still, we can design better systems.
So I want to talk about another piece of it, because that stuff is really important. Let's dive in though to the opportunity part of it, right? So how we put in the customer and the account, all of that stuff matters. Is it street? Is it ST? Is it core? Like all of those things matter, and they're important. And how we label them matters. If they're a distributor versus an end user, are they, all of these kinds of things matter, and we need to figure them out. When we get into the opportunity, it feels like, to me, that's one of the places where there's sort of the most room for confusion. One of the things, and I think, Chris, you mentioned it
Mhm.
briefly, like, or John, it might have been you, I'm not sure. Like, what are the rules to move something from stage to stage? Because every salesperson interprets it the way they want to, right? So one person will say, well, there's the automatic percentages, and this one says 30% chance of close. If I move it into the next stage, it's going to say 50% chance of close, but I only think there's a 30% chance. So I'm not going to, right? So what are the rules about moving it from stage to stage? Or another piece, and I'll let you guys take it from there, is that I don't really know. I don't really know what when this is going to close, but it's requiring me to put a close date. So I'm just going to write something. Like, is there a protocol around? Can you set it up so you don't fill it in? Do you have a rule that says, it's January 31st because nothing ever really closes on? Like, what do you do with some of these things that are the biggest confusion makers around opportunities? And Chris, I see you. Go.
I think even on that last point, what do you mean by close, right?
Yes.
Because I've seen people where their view of close is, I got agreement from the client that we're the vendor of choice and they're going to be ready to go forward. Most likely that's not going to mean close. Close means paperwork is signed, right? Like, we've gotten to an agreement, we've gone through contracts and everything else. So if you're basing off that first date, it might be a month and a half before you get to that actual close date, right? So how are you defining it? I think putting in fake close dates can be challenging, but I think you have to have a realistic view of when you're going to look at that, and then I would say adjust for some level of risk if you're not sure. And that risk is going to, because nobody really ever complains when a date gets pulled in or the dollar size goes up. They only really get agita when you slip a date, and you slip that date multiple times and things like that. So being able to understand, what are we really saying means closed? What are we really saying means qualified, whether that is marketing qualified, sales qualified, what have you. How are you moving between those different stages in your process? And if you can't get clear on that, get clear on that. It'll help in the way you design your system and what you're requiring from your sellers, your marketers, whoever else is using your CRM.
Mike, go. I know you're like dying.
Well, we are going to have an entire hour to talk about hour and a half to talk about process stuff. So I'll be really careful about this. But to Chris's point, have definitions of terms. Lead. As a leader inside the business, lead the team through the process, figure out what words mean, and document those definitions. And you can do all of that kind of work. Have as far as close dates go, if you don't have a close date, you don't have a deal. And I will die on that hill. Like, so the close date, right? Is it valid? Is it real? If the deal's not real, don't build it in. Don't build the opportunity into the system. And if you have people who are building deals without close dates or a view toward when someone wants to solve the specific problem that you're solving for, then I think you're a poor leader inside your organization. You have a bad system. Now, good close dates are things like fiscal years, calendar years, quarters, compelling events that take place inside the business that might indicate that money is going to be available, or some kind of MBO, management-based objective, is due to be delivered to the organization, or some other commitment that the board has made to others is due. Ask those questions. Ask better questions, have better definitions. And if you don't have those inside your organization, again, I challenge you as a leader. It sounds like I have a lot of leadership issues.
Yeah. Well, let's talk. We're going to talk about that another day. What other things, what other areas is there confusion that we need to set rules around within the CRM? And we are almost out of time. So any last thoughts on that? And then we can wrap up.
Speed at which information is updated. Like, let's update things as and when we have information. As leaders, be comfortable with the idea that deals are like chutes and ladders. They're going to go backward and they're going to go forward.
Yes.
Like, that's going to happen. Close dates are going to slip. If you don't empower and enable your team to lead in their opportunities, again, you've got a leadership challenge inside your business. So be comfortable with the idea that things are going to move back and forth. Stages are going to move back and forth. Dates are going to change back and forth. And then be very clear around how often you want that information to be current. And ideally, people are updating the CRM in their workflow, not pushing it to the end of the week like I used to do before I led a team. And then ultimately, when I started leading teams, found Salesforce or CRM religion.
Yeah. And so I think this is really important. So ideally, if you want the most updated information, that means you make it really easy for your salesperson to work in the CRM. And if you push them out of the CRM to do a whole bunch of other things, the CRM will always be out of date. But even if that's the case, then you need to set protocols. So one thing I know is if you do a funnel review and you stop it in the middle because nothing is updated and tell them that you'll see them tomorrow morning at 7 a.m., they won't do it too many times, right? So what are the rules around it must be updated to some extent at the end of every day, at the end of every week, and before your funnel review? And if it's not, there are consequences. And I think that's where the big thing is. Nobody's checking, right? If nobody's checking, nobody's measuring, as someone said earlier, I think Bryn, then it's not going to happen. If nobody cares if it's updated, it's not going to be updated. So those rules around protocols around when and how things get updated is really important. Chris, what do you think?
I think it's because you're asking for those updates, letting people understand how we're leveraging that data is important, because people don't want to feel like they're doing it just as an administrivia, right? They want to understand, why am I doing this? What's it matter? That way, when you're coming into those conversations with your sellers, you're echoing back what they're telling you through past interactions plus what's in the CRM, and you're able to have an intelligent conversation around that deal. Not, oh well, is the CRM just updated and you're checking a box? If that's the case,
Right.
guess what? I could
Okay.
hire a precocious 8th grader to do that.
Go ahead, Bryn, and then John, if you or Renee, if you have anything, then we'll wrap up. Go ahead,
Yes,
Bryn.
I think this really is the last thing that's going to just kind of piggyback off of that Chris's brilliance. Prioritize user adoption from the onset. You want to make sure you're involving the sales team early, you're getting their input, you're tailoring it to what you've learned from them. You've got that ongoing support, and to Chris's point, you're showcasing the value. And then you need to gather their input after implementation. You have to say, how is this working for you? Where are the gaps? Where are you getting stopped? What information are we not asking you for that we should be? What information do you have to give us that there's no place to put it, right? And I think when we do that and we're engaging the users, we're encouraging adoption, and ultimately we're creating a tool that is optimized for its purpose.
I'll add one thought on top of that. Bren built on Chris. I'll build on top of that. Is one of the things I get pulled in to help with a lot with CRM is there's too much stick and not enough carrot, right? Like telling people the why gets 80% there, but making it, to Bren's point, building in that user adoption, making a commitment to help people, to make it fun, add gamification, tie to commissions, add in spiffs, whatever it is. There's currently, yes, the stick has to come because we just got to say, you just got to do this, right? But there's a tremendous amount of thought that this is separate from sales. And that's where the stick comes in. When you make it part of sales and you add more carrot, then there's a lot less problem.
Any last thoughts?
I think my last thought would be, if you're the seller, you should be using the CRM as the way you're running your business. Right?
Yes.
Like, that's the easiest thing I can tell you. Like, this is a tool that lots of people have access to, lots of people get information from, but it is how you run your business.
Right. And if you think about it that way, then using it makes sense. All right, you guys. Well, thank you so much for joining us for our discussion of protocols around the CRM. Have a great day, everybody, and happy selling.